So good afternoon to the audience, not just here in person in this beautiful space, Lonnie Hall, in the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music, but also a remote audience from many different time zones. My name is Hiroshi Motomura. I'm the professor here at the UCLA School of Law, and I'm also faculty co-director of our Center for Immigration Law and Policy, sometimes known as SILP. Before we continue, I want to acknowledge that UCLA sits on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. As members of a land-grant institution, we at UCLA pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives, past, present, and emerging. I should say that this acknowledgement is especially fitting for our center. Any serious thinking about migration needs to understand how it's been intertwined with the histories of Native peoples. Many people at our Center for Immigration Law and Policy and at the School of Music devoted a great deal of time, energy, and acumen to plan and fine-tune everything imaginable to bring us here. And I'd especially like to thank Chloe Lynn, Talia Inlander, Sandra Hernandez, Stephanie Martinez-Stiffer, and Sofia Lopez-Franco for bringing us here today. Now, let me just take a minute to set the stage for today's conversation with Rob Bonta, the Attorney General of the state of California. California has a special place in addressing immigration and immigrant communities, frankly, much more constructively than anything we're seeing coming out of the White House or Washington, D.C. altogether. It's not just a matter of resisting, but it's also a matter of constructing an affirmative vision for immigration policy in the United States moving forward. It's important, I think, in this moment to think about how immigration is sometimes portrayed as a matter of outsiders trying to get in. So many times we've seen outsiders, or all non-citizens in some contexts, cast as invaders. And it's no accident that the word invasion appears in so many of the executive orders we've seen since January 20th. But that view of immigration law silences the voices of many in the country, many voices of people who are here, who are part of our communities. They may be the families in the communities, of people being directly impacted by the decisions of the federal government, can be businesses that want to hire them, or the colleges and universities that want to enroll them. Immigration isn't about keeping out invaders. It's a way to think about how to build strong communities in localities in the United States. And this makes the role of California, I think, so crucial. I'm explaining this as a way of thinking about how important it is we're having a conversation today with Attorney General Bonta. It's a time when states and counties, cities, and school districts are the arenas where we can reject the view that immigration is a simple-minded question of protection from invasion. Instead, it's at the state and local level that immigration policy can move beyond gridlock and hyperpolarization, partisan hyperpolarization, and where we can embrace a vision of immigration that emphasizes the economy, education, and the way we live our lives in communities. So we're especially fortunate to have with us today a leader in California government. Our special guest, Attorney General Rob Bonta, is the 34th Attorney General of the state of California. Mr. Bonta has had a distinguished career as a public servant, having served as Deputy City Attorney for my home city, the city and county of San Francisco, then on the Alameda City Council, and then in the California State Assembly representing the 18th District, which is in the East Bay, including cities of Oakland and Alameda, where he was the first Filipino American to serve in the California State Legislature, and he came to chair the Asian Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus. Attorney General Bonta was most recently elected to a full 4-year term of office in 2022, and he's twice a graduate of Yale University, first at Yale College and then Yale Law School. We at SILP would especially like to express our thanks to Attorney General Bonta for his willingness to have this conversation. Today continues a series of public conversations that we've hosted here at SILP with influential decision makers, including with DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, with U.S. Senator Alex Padilla, and with Urjadu, the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Attorney General Bonta will be in conversation with my friend and colleague, Ahilan Arulanantham. Ahilan joined the UCLA Law faculty 4 years ago. And as I just realized that the last time I said that in this room, I said he had just joined the UCLA And so it's been 4 years. We've worked together very closely. We're both faculty co-directors of the Center for Immigration Law and Policy. And Ahilan joined us after almost 2 decades at the ACLU of Southern California as one of the most respected and prominent advocates in the nation for immigrants' rights. And he continues in that role today, but also, I should add, is not just a prominent advocate, but a prominent thinker in this space. Among his many honors, Ahilan received a 2016 MacArthur Foundation Fellowship for his human rights work. So I'll now ask Ahilan, Attorney General Bonta, to come on stage, and we'll have the conversation that I know we've all been eagerly anticipating. Thank you.
That on? It is. Well, thank you for the kind introduction, Hiroshi, and thank you so much, Attorney General Bonta, for being here. It's really, really a pleasure to have you. We're really so lucky to have you.
My pleasure.
I have to say before we get started, just for a little background, you must be the best soccer player in like higher levels of government in the entire country. True? Is it true? I mean, it must be, right? Like
I was going to say we have the Yale Law School intramural midfield duo reunited here. So I was very excited about this moment.
I also did not know until I was just doing the last bit of preparation for this that your daughter is now playing professional soccer in Brazil. Huh?
She is. She is. If you guys have
mind-boggling.
half an hour or more, I'll talk to you all about my daughter.
Yeah,
that's shameless, proud dad, but she plays professionally in Brazil.
Yeah, that's incredible. I wish we could spend all the time talking about soccer. It would actually be more fun in some ways in this conversation, but there's a lot of heavy topics to discuss. So let's get into it. I mean, so one thing I wanted to ask you about was how you think about the lawsuits that you're bringing now. You just filed this lawsuit on tariffs. I'm sure people all across the political spectrum are probably thrilled about that, challenging the Trump administration's tariff program. There's an earlier one about the Department of Education challenging an attempt to take away grants because of DEI or something related to that. There's a DOJ one about privacy, right? There hasn't been, I think, but you tell me if that's wrong, in this administration, a comparable immigrants' rights kind of signature lawsuit, but maybe that's not true. I don't know. So I guess I have two questions. Like one is, how do you think about this? Because it's like a fire hose. Like, how do you pick the ones that you choose to bring your resources on? And then second question is like, is there any hesitancy about immigration compared to the other ones? Because, you know, the politics of the election and how all that stuff played out. So how do you think about those?
Great. Well, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me. Good to see everybody. I'm excited to spend the next bit of time with you and talk about our immigration work. I'll answer the second question first. There's no hesitancy. We are fully prepared for a whole slew of potential actions that the Trump administration may take, that they've signaled that they will take, that they have put in writing that they will take in Project 2025, whether it's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act or the Insurrection Act or trying to withhold funding to sanctuary jurisdictions. We're prepared to sue on all of those. So why haven't we in those areas? And is there a sort of centerpiece immigration case so far? The first case that we brought was an immigration case of sorts. It was the executive order brought on Inauguration Day, issued on Inauguration Day to seek to revoke birthright citizenship in a blatant violation of the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause. There's case law from California in the U.S. Supreme Court, Wong Kim Ark case out of San Francisco that reaffirmed that the Constitution says what it says, that if you're born on American soil, you're a citizen, period, full stop. President sought to amend the Constitution with a stroke of the pen in an executive order. There's a way to, as you know, to amend the Constitution. That's not the way. And so we brought a lawsuit on day one, within day two, actually the next day, to challenge that. But the way we look at the lawsuits are twofold. One, we will sue the president any and every time he violates the law or violates the Constitution. And two, we need to have standing as states. So if an individual is harmed, like an individual immigrant, a student, someone with TPS, Mr. Abrego Garcia, they have standing as individuals. The state doesn't necessarily. The standing that we have to show is usually financial in nature, is the financial impact that it has on the state of California. We argued in our birthright citizenship case that 25,000 Californians who were deserving of and entitled to birthright citizenship wouldn't get it, and all the privileges and supports, including the federal financial supports that they would be qualified for and entitled to, and that we would have to backfill that to provide support for them when they were wrongfully being stripped of their citizenship. Many of the cases that we brought are what I describe it as being the same move or the same action applied with different applications, and that is the attempt by the federal administration to withhold already congressionally appropriated funding. They've done it in a lot of different forms. They do it when they try to shrink or eradicate a department or an agency like Health and Human Services or the Department of Education. Our second case involved an Office of Management and Budget memo that sought to withhold $3 trillion in already congressionally appropriated funding. And so we have a couple of cases on DOGE attacking the constitutionality or lawfulness of Elon Musk and his Doge army's access to private information of Californians and Americans. And then we have our tariffs case. So we have a whole range of cases, but they're all based on sort of one basic principle. Did the Trump administration break the law or violate the Constitution? And is it ripe for us as a state to bring the case?
Right. And then is it harming Californians? And that's the second half of it. When you say the standing part, it's like, and is it harming Californians in that way?
Right. And it's usually the California government. And so for the tariffs, we argued that the goods that we purchase as a government purchaser will rise in price. The vendors that we work with will charge us more. People who are harmed will need to get unemployment assistance that we pay for as a state government. So that's the angle. But we have been involved in many of the immigration cases, TPS and others, as amicus, because we don't think we have standing to be a party, but we believe in the principles at stake and want to weigh in.
So that's a good segue. I want to ask you a sort of like a meta question, I guess, which is about that TPS litigation. So that's our case, Center for Immigration Law and Policy, and other organizations too have brought that, and it's a lawsuit. Now it's challenging both the termination of TPS for Venezuela and for Haiti. 600,000 people from Venezuela, 500,000 people from Haiti, who the administration is trying to take back the TPS benefits that the Biden administration had granted. It's unprecedented. We want to, but the question I want to ask you about is actually, it's sort of like it's a meta question about how we talk about the role of race in immigration policy, and how you, as a prominent public voice on these issues, think about the question. So the administration spewed just a mountain of hateful lies and racist rhetoric against Venezuelan TPS holders specifically, like in the lead up to the election and during the decision-making process, and it's gone on. These lies about Venezuela emptied out its prison and mental institutions and sent the people here, and this whole like made-up things about Tren de Aragua, this gang. Not that there aren't some people in that gang in this country, but this idea that they've taken over apartments and they're running a war and invading is all just sort of fantasy. In the case, we introduced a bunch of evidence about this, and the judge actually went through the evidence and found, and I brought the quote here. I think I brought it here somewhere. He said ultimately that acting on, here, let me see if I can pull it actually here. He says, acting on the basis of a generalization, no, okay, I don't have it. But acting on the basis of generalizations for 600,000 people based on the harmful actions of just a few is the classic textbook definition of racism. That's what he said. And then he has this list of all the statements that Trump and Secretary Noem have made, including these lies about racism and all that stuff, about gangs and all these things. You issued a statement, a superb statement, and a statement that I know made a lot of Venezuelan TPS holders really happy, actually, after the decision came down. And you said, among other things, there's 72,000 TPS holders from Venezuela in California, and they make enormous contributions to the state. And that was pulled from the amicus brief that you had filed, as you mentioned. But that statement, and it's a fantastic statement, it's really a genuine question. It doesn't say the R word in it, right? It doesn't call what the administration is doing racist, but it undermines it in a kind of in a subtle way by saying like, hey, these are important people who make contributions to our state, which is contrary to their narrative that these are all people that are harming the country, right? So I'm wondering, like, yeah, like how do you think about this? Do you ever think, oh, well, we should call it racism? Because I know you get it, right? From everything, from your background, all the work you've done, all this, I know you get it. But I guess I'm wondering, like, is it useful, you think, to call that out? Or is it better to just sort of engage on the facts and not use that label? And how do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll first say that the Trump administration's actions and conduct towards immigrants is racist and it's xenophobic, period, full stop, from my perspective. And that's not being unfair or being political. His conduct earned it. And so you call things based on accurate descriptions of what someone does. Trump and his dad were sued by a former presidential administration for racist activity in their housing business. Donald Trump birthed President Obama.
Yeah.
That's racist. He has said things like immigrants are poisoning the blood of America. During COVID, he referred to COVID as the Wuhan virus, the Kung flu, the China virus. So there's no doubt that he has earned a label as being racist towards immigrants, being racist in his policy. That, to me, saying that the conduct is racist doesn't necessarily resonate with all audiences. Some people understand it, have lived it, and get it. Some think it's what some people say when they don't get what they want, and that there isn't much racism in the world. So I realize that people, based on their own lived experiences, their own ideology, have different views of the existence and prevalence of racism. So we try to focus on the law and just making it clear that based on the facts and the law, he's breaking it. And yes, I might hold the opinion that it's driven by racist ideology or perspective, but he can harbor a racist idea and take a lawful action. He can harbor a racist idea and take an unlawful action. We're going to win or lose based on whether it's lawful or unlawful. But I also want to say this about the Trump administration and an observation of his rhetoric, what he said on the campaign trail, even what he's saying now and what he's been doing. He talked a lot about focusing on violent, undocumented criminals. And what he did was very different. So such a huge delta between what he says and this is his salesmanship. He's a salesman. He's trying to pitch something and make it palatable to the American people. And then what he's done on day one, he went after unborn children who are deserving of U.S. citizenship.
Right.
I mean, U.S. citizens. He's talked about deporting U.S. citizens. He's gone after people with lawful status, TPS, DACA, refugees who are fleeing persecution and violence. And so he removed the policy that Biden had on sensitive sites, now going after immigration enforcement in schools where children learn, in hospitals where patients heal, in churches where the faithful pray. That is not going after violent criminals. And whether you're documented or undocumented, if you commit a violent crime, you should be held accountable and prosecuted. And so his rhetoric is very inflammatory, but we have to look at his actual conduct.
Right. Now that makes a lot of sense. And I think I struggle with this a lot because in litigation, if there's government action that's motivated by race discrimination, then it's unconstitutional, right? That fact alone renders it unconstitutional, even if it might be constitutional to do the same thing if you had a different motivation. So I find myself sometimes in the position of having to talk to judges who may not, they may be in one of the other categories you described, like their lived experience, whatever, it may not mean much, be very compelling to them, and having to make that argument. And it sounds like what you're saying is that where it resonates, then you pointed out, but where it's not so, then you talk about other things. Is that sort of roughly?
I mean, if it's a legal element, racial animus, And it's part of your case. Yeah, you raise it and you make your case. And I think racism is very much in the eye of the beholder in many ways. Some people could look at the same thing and some say that's racist or some say not. Maybe the most extreme examples, not as much, but there might be some gray areas as well. But I think it's important, just like when I'm talking not in a courtroom setting or in a legal setting, and talking about, what I think drives this presidential administration, what their worldview is, and who they're going after and why they're going after it. Like, why are they going after lawful people? This isn't a thing about lawfulness versus unlawfulness, being lawfully present or being a citizen or not. They're already attacking lawfully present individuals and citizens. Why?
Yeah.
Often because they're black or brown. They're not white. Why did he say good things about Norway and go after shithole countries from Africa? It's all part of the same ideology.
So you mentioned DACA. There's several hundred DACA holders who are employed by the University of California, and the way they have their employment authorization is through DACA. There's some number, I don't know the number, but there's definitely people in state government for sure, I'm sure you know this too, whose employment authorization is through DACA. The same is true of TPS. I don't know the numbers in quite the same kind of way, but there's definitely lots and lots of TPS holders, and their only employment authorization is through TPS, both in the University of California and the state of California more generally. Have you all thought about what will happen if this litigation, that's happening on both of those issues and other things, where people have employment authorization, if that fails? It's no guarantee that DACA is going to be upheld. That litigation has been going on for a long time. It definitely could end badly. And the same is true of TPS. Is this something that you all have thought about? What have you thought about how to prepare for what happens if the government, just decides, or a court decides, that's it, all these people lose their employment authorization, and just like that, it's gone?
I mean, a lot of the actions that we're in, they have a really dark potential ending, and they have one that's full of justice and light if we're able to be successful in our cases. So I don't spend too much time thinking about the scenario. I think about what I can do now, what I think is appropriate under the law, under my values, and how we can fight. I also get some inspiration from Trump 1.0, not from his administration, but the fight back against it, including the California Attorney General's office that sued him over 120 times, won a supermajority of the time, vast majority of the time, including on DACA, on public charge expansion proposal, fighting back against the wall being built, and pushing back against withholding funding from sanctuary jurisdictions in California. We have a great case in California, United States versus California, that upholds specifically SB 54, our California Values Act, and some will call that our sanctuary state law. So I focus on what we can do now. The cases that I've talked about, the 15 that we've brought, we've been very successful in them, broadly speaking. We've in a majority of them, we've gotten temporary restraining orders or preliminary injunctions. To get those, you need a court to both say you're at risk of suffering from irreparable harm, and you're likely to succeed on the merits. Meaning you've made a showing that we think you're probably going to win this case. Well, I might change my mind, but I know today, if I had to make a decision, you're more likely than not to win. And so we think we're in good standing in these cases. That the courts, broadly speaking, are doing what they're supposed to do, and that gives me hope. That's how the system's supposed to work. It's not supposed to have a president who so blatantly, brazenly, consistently, and frequently breaks the law and violates the Constitution. But if he does, if that's his choice, the remedy is to go to court and have courts listen to the facts, review the law, apply it to the case, and make a decision and issue a court order. And so, and then if our cases don't prevail, I think, and some of those dark scenarios do occur, there's the political process, and people will be hurt until the political process is able to reconstitute itself, so that we have retake the House, have a Senate where we can move legislation, and then have a president who can sign it. But I still believe, I'm rather stubbornly optimistic, sometimes hopelessly optimistic. I think we're going to have comprehensive immigration reform one day. I think we will. The fact that we haven't doesn't mean we won't. Sometimes the best things have taken time, and I think there's a bridge too far. There's limits for people. When folks see good people who are here fleeing from circumstances that are dangerous or violent, who are their neighbors and their friends and their coworkers and their colleagues, then I think people will rise up and make their voices heard through elections, and we'll get to where we need to be. But there's an immediacy in it. There's an urgency in it. There's people now, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, who could be hurt. So that's why I think of in our lawsuits, and that's why I want to help.
Got it. I just say you're saying you believe in comprehensive immigration reform still might happen. It reminds me of these times in these games that I can remember from that season when the ball was like really far away, and I was like, "There's no way he's going to get to that ball." And you ran like really, really fast, you know. And sometimes you got to them, and but sometimes you didn't. Like, you know, it's been 20 years, you know.
I wouldn't get to them today, but I did then.
So one thing more concrete that I have thought about with respect to what might the government do if these things happen is try to employ people with a reading of federal law, which we've communicated with your office about in the past, which is this idea that the federal law prohibiting the hiring of undocumented people does not apply to state government employers, right? And this is the idea underneath this campaign called the Opportunity for All campaign, which undocumented students at UCLA and now at other UCs and at the California state system and even some in the community college system have tried to push for several years. And something which I know you know, but I think is worth a lot of people in the audience understanding is that DACA, because of its cutoff date and because of the litigation which has prevented newly eligible people from actually getting it, DACA has effectively been shut off for now 6 years, something like that, for people who would otherwise be eligible for it. And there's a whole generation now of undocumented university students who fit the profile perfectly of your dream student. They came here when they were really young, undocumented, went through the school system, are now in college and are in grad school. There's there's law students throughout, University of California, brilliant students, some of these students, and they don't qualify for DACA because they came to the US after the cutoff date for DACA. So the campaign was really focused on trying to, even now, before the second Trump administration, get the University of California to agree that these students could be research assistants and teaching assistants, and also that they could work in the library and the cafeteria and have jobs. Some of this history, I'm sure we first tried to get the University of California to do it. First, they said they would, then they sort of changed their mind. Then it became legislation. The legislation passed the House, it passed the Senate, the governor vetoed it. It was just like weeks before the election, this presidential election, that the governor vetoed it. Then it went into the courts. And now it's pending in the California Court of Appeal, and there's actually the argument is coming in just a few weeks. So I know this is a tricky issue for a bunch of reasons. So one thing I want to know is, like, do you have a view? You're not the governor, and yet. One question I have is, like, do you have a view about what might motivate the government of California on this issue, and what might motivate it to change its position, if that's possible, is kind of one question. And then I'll ask you like a broader question about, like, what should these students do? What should people who are in this position, they're already undocumented, they're already, even before all this stuff that just happened, what message do you kind of have for them?
And the students that you're talking about are, but for the cutoff on DACA would be otherwise DACA eligible.
Yeah, they'd be
have DACA status.
Yeah,
dreamers.
So there's two sets. There's some people who are actually eligible now, but the court case, because the injunction that's been in place for years now from the Southern District of Texas has foreclosed new applicants. They can't apply, even though they actually do meet the cutoff date. And then there's other people. Now there's increasingly, that's more common actually, students who are too young, in a sense, to qualify for DACA, even though they fit the kind of profile completely. Yeah.
And they don't have any other status.
Don't have any other status.
Right. I mean, I'll make a value statement about it. I think they should enjoy in California all of the opportunities that someone who does have DACA has. based on the criteria, if they meet it, which includes working, right? I was in the legislature for 8.5 years. I'm no longer in the legislature, but if I were there, I'm sure I would have voted for this. And it's right to have the campaign. It's right for the legislature to put it on the governor's desk. I think the governor has to think about the consequences for the whole state. I think part of what he might be concerned about is what it means for federal funding, and not necessarily the retaliation part if it's unlawful, but what the federal government might be able to lawfully do to harm our UC system. I think it's important for our government to look at big systems, our educational system, our healthcare system, our public safety system, and protect it and defend it. It's best if you can do all the things, have a great system that's high quality, and make sure every individual who's a part of it, including students who wouldn't otherwise have DACA or Dreamer status, are able to have the opportunities that they should. So I always look for the both ands. I don't know exactly what he's thinking about, but I'm glad the legislature is continuing to push on this. I think there's another bill this year, right?
Yeah, it's AB 713. It's
Yeah.
coming back again. Yeah.
So maybe the governor has a different view of it, or maybe the issue that he's concerned about gets addressed. But it would be nice to be able to do what I think is very consistent with California's values, which is support these young people.
Yeah, one thing I've wondered about was whether if the administration, if DACA ends, or if TPS ends for one of these large populations, and you have then all these people who are employed already by the University of California, now, in theory, the University of California is supposed to fire like 400 of its employees because some court has said that they can't do this anymore. And I've wondered if maybe in that moment, then they might be willing to take the step that they haven't been willing to take so far. And say, okay, now, it was one thing to not give employment opportunities to these students who deserve it, even though I don't think that's right, but it's a different thing now to actually, to fire the people. And so now we'll kind of do it. And then presumably the same could conceivably be true of the state of California or various other aspects of government, institutions of government that would have similar kinds of problems facing them.
Mm-hmm. No, that could be. As the stakes rise, as the injury heightens, there could be a different balancing in the decision making of the governor and California, and maybe in the courts too, if the injury increases.
So I have some other sort of policy-ish questions that I might come back to you, depending on how if things go here. But I want to ask you again, like a more meta question, a different kind of question. You were a legislator for all this time. You championed some spectacular legislation. The ban on private detention is one of them, but a bunch of them. Then now obviously been the Attorney General for some time, and you're interfacing with immigrants' rights advocates, I imagine, all the time, and you would have a ton in the legislature and regularly now. What would you do differently if you were an immigrants' rights advocate in terms of how the immigrants' rights movement approaches its work? And I say that, obviously there's organizers, there's litigators, there's policy advocates. It's kind of a general question, but like, if you were there thinking like, I would be more empowered to advance the values that I care about on immigrants' rights issues if the movement was doing blank, or they did this or that. What would that be?
Well, let me first say I have leads in my office that lead on important policy areas, and one of them is immigration. And we hired an advocate who's an attorney, Jackie Gonzalez, to be the lead. And her breadth of experience, her connections to the advocacy world, her experience in the advocacy world have been invaluable. She was the lead sponsor on the bills that I authored to ban for-profit private prisons and immigration detention centers. The for-profit private prison ban is still the law of the state, but unfortunately, the Biden administration challenged the immigration detention center part, and that got struck down based on the intergovernmental immunities clause and the relationship of the federal government to the states. But since then, or before then, there were also laws that provided AGs with inspection rights in all the detention centers. The California AG, inspection rights, and we go into all of the facilities, and we do a report every year, and we report on usually very substandard conditions of confinement, whether it be mental health care or other aspects of detention health care, exposure during COVID, and lack of appropriate protocols. And we have a report coming out soon, which will reveal some of the ongoing substandard conditions in there. And I think it's important for, we can't necessarily take those findings and shut these places down, but it's important for policymakers who can, Congress, federal leaders, to know what's happening in these facilities, and that people are getting harmed. We also brought a bill that Jackie was the sponsor for that allowed a private right of action when the conditions of a contract with a private detention center were violated and someone was harmed. So we did a lot in,
And that provision
that
survived, correct?
Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah, that
That's
provision
still
is
a
in
law.
effect, right?
Still a law. So one, I think it's important for immigration advocates and governments to work together. Right? We did a series of roundtables leading up to the Trump inauguration, where we met with leaders and advocates across the state, from San Diego to LA to the Central Coast, Sacramento, and we wanted to hear what their concerns were, what they were seeing, what they were worried about. And we think that we're at our best when we're listening to others, when we're talking to people who are on the ground, who have the trust of and are representing immigrants who could be impacted. And we continue to benefit from those relationships because they flag things for us. They ask us if they tell us what we're seeing and what we can do. We issued some guidance, for example, on individuals portraying themselves as ICE agents after some of the immigration advocates shared that was happening in their community. Some became more public with some news stories, but they're able to daylight certain challenges and share them with us. And I think now, go full speed ahead and, be unapologetic. All the things that you've done that the advocate community has done, don't slow down. It's more important now than ever. Don't be bullied. Don't be frightened. There's certain times when you're called to do more. This is one of them, not less. It's time to lean in and fight harder, not take a step back and contemplate. You know who you are, you know what you stand for, you know who you care about, you know what's right, fight for it. And we need people who will fight. And there are some who aren't, who are, law firms who aren't, very unfortunately.
We're seeing that.
And it's sad and it's wrong and it's not what we need. Meeting the moment, that's the opposite of it.
Mm-hmm.
Meeting the moment means, fighting harder, but being, I would say creative, have situational awareness. There are some things that this president is saying that do have resonance with the American people about securing the border. And when it comes to, violent actions by undocumented immigrants. And there have been some examples of that they've really focused on and leaned in. And they, to your point at the very beginning, they've tried to make the rare incident the common one in the minds of the American people. Mm-hmm. But we have to understand that resonance and be political and strategic in how we act. So I think the collaboration is important. I think advocacy plus political awareness and instincts is good too. And I think courage and fighting is critical.
That's very helpful. I'll say something concrete. I want to come back to what you said about sanctuary, which I'll come back to in a minute. But before that, I want to say something very concrete, and I want to say it and also get your thoughts on it. So when this bill, the undocumented students bill I was talking about earlier, went through the legislature last year, there were undocumented students who came and testified in the state assembly, both the assembly and the Senate, actually. And they would start their testimony by saying, I'm an undocumented student without DACA. And there was large rallies they did outside, earlier at the University of California Regents meeting, they hunger struck. I mean, amazing advocacy, powerful. They genuinely, many of them genuinely fear that they cannot do that now, and have actually wondered about whether they can even bring the force, political force and mobilization needed to generate the energy to get over the hump, in part because they are scared that they can't make a statement like that in the press because the ICE officer now could be watching that and they'll go arrest them right then.
Yeah.
And can you imagine somebody going and saying this in the California Assembly? Do you have any thoughts about that, or any kind of reaction to that's a tough problem, right? I mean, it's
Yeah, no, that's very understandable, and I think you need to be prudent and thoughtful, and th that was different than what I was referring to. I was thinking about the firms like Paul Weiss, who have the ability to fight and to push back for the rule of law, who are not, and you know the fear and the chilling effect is real. There are kids not going to school. There are people not going to work. There are folks because of the sensitive site policy changing who aren't going.
Sensitive locations memo.
Sensitive locations aren't going to hospitals, aren't going to kids in schools and not going to churches. So that's all real. So got to be thoughtful about it, but you know the right voices at the right times, continuing to push, I think is appropriate. But that fear is real. And look, the federal government has the right to enforce immigration law if they do it lawfully. They can't do it unlawfully. They can't violate the Fourth Amendment. They can't detain you unlawfully. They can't invoke laws that don't apply, in our view, the Insurrection Act or the Alien Enemies Act in certain situations. But they can lawfully enforce immigration laws. So and Californians, you know, American people are criminally prohibited from obstructing or interfering with them doing it lawfully. So that has to be understood and recognized.
Let me go back and ask that the sanctuary question that I wanted to ask a second ago. You had said this is a moment to keep going, keep pushing. And I know there's disagreement within the advocacy community. There's certainly some strong sectors of the immigrants' rights advocacy community in California that wanted to use this moment to push for expansions in the sanctuary laws on a couple of different vectors. One vector is about data privacy and the fact that the current rules prohibiting the cooperation with some forms of immigration enforcement only apply to some government agencies. State government agencies don't apply to others. Another vector of it. So there's like there's the like it doesn't apply to prisons, which is a subject which has been, I think, the Vision Act and the Home Act has like come again and again. Then there's also these issues about data privacy, like the sort of transmission of data, not in law enforcement context, but from other kinds of social service agencies and things like that. That's one end where I know the governor, and I'm guessing you sort of indirectly one way or another are getting pressured right from the advocates. And then on the other side, I know you've got local governments which are doing local governments in California, which are kind of doing what you were saying. This is not the moment to back down, but there's actually some local governments that want to do more cooperation, and they actually want to contravene the California Values Act, and that's partly some of them are, I think, sympathetic to the Trump administration's view of this subject more generally. And then maybe there are others that are kind of like, hey, it's sort of Paul Weiss-ish, like maybe this is a time when we should make friendly, even if we wouldn't have done this with the federal government, even if we wouldn't have done it into the Biden administration. So I'm curious for your thoughts on both of those subjects. So I feel like you all are getting it kind of from in different sort of opposite pressure from the advocates community to say, hey, this is a moment to expand sanctuary protection. Let's speak for California's values. And then you also got it from the other side, local government saying, what are you doing? Like, we should, if the nation has spoken, Trump won, so won the election, so there should be greater cooperation, at least on sort of criminal law enforcement.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with that second part first. The Trump got thrashed in California, so and there's no national mandate. He won by 1.5% of the popular vote. That's not a landslide. That's not a mandate. He won, and he won the electoral college vote, and that's what decides. And he won all the swing states. So, but he does not have a mandate. His popularity and his approval rating is 41% now. So it's in the tank. It is lower than it was at this time under Trump 1.0. It's lower than Bush and Biden and Obama all at this time, 100 days in. So this idea that is often stated but not true needs to be pushed back on. That America, the country voted for this. This is what we want. There's you still can't violate the Constitution. You still can't violate the law. You can't vote for violating the Constitution and violating the law. And California should do what California's always done and what's consistent with their values and how we voted in this election. Trump got under 40%. He was in the 30s. There was definitely, Harris won by less of a margin than Biden, but she still won by a lot here in California. And California voted for SB 54 back in 2016. It's been the law for almost a decade. And is now the time to expand it? I think that's where some of that political sensibility, strategy comes into play. There's what we think might be best, but there's also what's like politics is the art of what's possible. Is it possible to pass that now? Would the governor sign it? The governor has not been interested in signing the Vision Act time after time, not in Trump 2.0, during Biden. So will he change?
He says the
now?
right. I feel like if he said, "I think it strikes the right balance. We struck the right balance now." Something like that. He said things like that for
Yeah,
a while.
like the status quo.
Yeah.
And there are exceptions in SB 54, as you said. It doesn't apply in our state prison system. It doesn't apply in our jail system for transfers for serious and violent felonies and some enumerated misdemeanors as well. And San Diego, the supervisors voted to have a stronger sanctuary law within the county, and that there was a lot of political furor about that, and not uncontroversial. And so that's an example of a jurisdiction wanting to do more than the state.
I mean, LA County Sheriff's does substantially more, I think, than what the SB 54 requires. And that was true even under what people perceived as sort of Trumpy, sheriffs in Los Angeles County. Their position has been, we're not going to do any. They go to the maximum opt out that's available under SB 54. Like we don't. ICE doesn't get to come in here. They don't interview. They don't have a phone call. Nothing. They're like not here. We don't talk to them. Zero. So yeah, definitely there's some local jurisdictions that are doing that have done for a while the opposite of what I was talking about for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And SB 54 provides for local jurisdictions to do more if they wish. And many folks in law enforcement believe that when victims come forward and witnesses come forward and cooperate with law enforcement without fear of retaliation, that they will have immigration and enforcement consequences if they come forward as a victim or a witness. That's good for public safety. That helps law enforcement investigate and solve cases. And when law enforcement can focus on crime instead of civil immigration enforcement and use their limited resources to tackle crime, violent crime, serious crime, that's the best use of those limited resources. That's the whole idea of SB 54. But some local jurisdictions have made statements about SB 54, some local sheriffs, about what they think or what they may do. And to me, that's politics. I think it's performative. I think it's posturing. I think they're talking to their base. It's what they do. And none of them have done the thing that they have said yet. I'm not naive to think that they might not, but if they do, then we will enforce. SB 54 is the law of the state of California. It has to be followed. You don't get to choose. You don't get to choose when there's a new president. You didn't get to choose from 2016 or 17 when it was passed to now. It's the law. You follow it all the time. And these are law enforcement entities. Their job is to enforce the law, and that means following the law. That means following SB 54. So we're fully prepared to go to court to enforce any violations of SB 54 against any law enforcement agency, should they do it.
Wow. Good to know. Definitely good to know. I think, do we have time for a couple more? I don't know. We do? Okay. So let me move, because there were some very interesting audience questions that had come, and I wonder what you think about some of these. So one question, we solicited a bunch of questions on the internet from people who registered. Not doing our own research, to be clear. We were just like 4 people who had registered, and we asked a bunch of questions. So one question was, there have been massive cuts to legal service providers who provide services to indigent immigrants in deportation proceedings in different ways. There have been cuts to the detention legal service providers, and it's unbelievable in some ways. These are the people who are jailed under the immigration laws, and the money that goes to allow those people to have access to lawyers has been cut. But of course, it's completely consistent with the ideology of the administration. You don't believe in due process, jail everyone, don't let them talk to a lawyer. Perhaps, equally bad and maybe worse, there have been cuts to the children, the representation, federal money, representing children. California has provided its own money for representation programs for people in immigration court for a number of years. And I remember when it first started, people said, this is crazy. It's the federal government's problem. The federal government should fix it. Why is the state going to pay money for due process in a program where the federal government should be providing that? But then, people push back and we're like, well, because it's our people, and our people who live in California are getting put through this process. Their families are being torn apart. Their children hit the social service system and all these things. So it's a priority for us. Do you have a view about whether the state should try to fill this gap? And is that something that you, first is that question. And second question is, as the Attorney General, do you think there's a path? I'm not sure that there is, but do you think there's a path for your office to sort of do anything about that?
I think that California should fill the gap. So I say California, I choose that word carefully. I think it's tragic and wrong that unaccompanied minors don't have legal counsel. I think anyone who's in a removal proceeding should have access to an attorney. It's almost outcome determinative, like it is in landlord-tenant cases. If you have someone who can inform you of what your rights are and vindicate your rights in a proceeding, then you're more likely to get treated justly. And if you don't have an attorney, less likely to be treated justly. And I think people should be treated justly and have an attorney who fights for them and advocates for them and represents them. If the federal government's not doing it, it is a right instinct to say the federal government should do it, but they're not. And the individuals are not going to get the representation they deserve if someone doesn't do it. So we just got to fix the problem. And California put in a slug of $25 million more for legal representation for immigrants. At the same time, during the legislative special session that they, I'm very thankful to say, gave $25 million to my office for the work that we're going to have trying to make sure that the Trump administration follows the law. It's not enough. I think California can do more. I think others can do more. I don't think the state can do it all. I think there could be some counties that can help. And I think the foundation world can really help. A lot of the foundation world, bless them, are asking the question, how can we help? What is our role at this time? We have millions and millions of dollars. And when they've asked me, I've said, if we can get every Californian in a removal proceeding an attorney, that would be enormously impactful. And I'm not asking you to do it all, but I'm asking you to take on some of it if you can, when they've asked. And so if California does some, the foundation world does some, maybe others, then I think California collectively,
Right.
those different sources within our state should provide that.
Yeah, New York City now, more than 10 years ago, the city, not the state, but the city guaranteed legal representation for every detained New Yorker, right? If you were a member of one, if you were a resident of one of the boroughs and you ended up detained, the city would guarantee that you had a lawyer, and they did it through a mix of philanthropy and city money, and in a variety of ways. And then they ran it through a public defense system. And I know many advocates have looked and said, New York did it. Why can't California do it? Why can't Los Angeles do it? And there's a variety of reasons. It's complicated, but maybe this is the time for something like that to happen.
That's a great model,
Yeah.
and it's nice that it's already happened somewhere. And we have a very healthy, competitive race to the top relationship with New York.
There you go.
So now
There you
we're
go.
more motivated to not let New York do something better than us.
I mean, so here's another one. Very interesting question. I wonder what you think of it. You've sued Doge over data issues. It appears to be Doge behind this government action that sent hundreds of thousands, maybe more, letters to people in the mail saying, sorry, I think some was paper mail and some was electronic. I'm not, saying you have lost your right to live here. You have 7 days to leave the country, and if you do not leave, we will come and find you. Like a threat kind of message. We have TPS holder clients who got this. there's many people who are in regular removal proceedings and have a date, which is later, not in 7 days. And I'm not aware of any law that, as such, might say like, oh, you have 7 days for enforcing. This is just kind of crazy thing that they did. But it's an official government communication, and no doubt, many people took it seriously. Is that something? So then there was an email train about this where a bunch of law professors were discussing this, and someone was like, "I think this is wire fraud." Or it must be something. I mean, this just seems like outrageous. Like, how can the government tell a bunch of people that they have to leave the country, and a bunch of them will do it, and it's just false. They don't actually have to leave the country. So the question is, did you hear about this? Do you know anything? I mean, there's so many things happening. So, have you heard about this? Is it something you think your office might be interested in? That was the question.
Yeah, definitely heard about it, and think that it is very potentially actionable, maybe not by the states, maybe by the individuals who've received it, but maybe by the states. So we'd probably have to investigate it a little further to identify what the causes of action be, the standing. But it is part of this idea, which I think is also it's revealing. The Trump administration wants people to self-deport, and Mr. Homan was saying that a lot as he was taking office. That's what this is, the letter. And look, it carries a lot of weight. Even if someone knows that they have lawful standing to live here and are lawfully present, something from the federal government, an official communication that says something like that, is very intimidating, very coercive, very potentially compelling and scary. But it's revealing in the sense that their goals for deportation, I don't think that they believe that they can achieve them through their own work, and that they need people to self-deport in order to do it. And I think people should stand on their rights. If you're lawfully present and you get the letter, throw the letter in the mail. You're lawfully present. It's wrong. It is false. And so it's important to, if I think U.S. citizens got this.
Yes.
They don't need to, there's no reason for them to be deported to where? To another state in the U.S.? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, people should stand on their rights. If they're lawfully present, they get the letter, you're lawfully present. The executive government tries to do this all the time. It tries to rewrite existing laws, like the Civil Rights Act with its DEI approach. It tries to amend the Constitution with like its executive order on birthright citizenship. It just can't. The president can't do unlawful things. He can do things within his own authority. He can't change the laws. He can't make someone who's lawfully present now, all of a sudden, because of a letter, unlawfully present and deportable. They can't. So, but I'll have my crack team look at that one more to see what our litigation options are.
I can't. Is that saying we're at time, or that we're at time? Oh no, we got 5 minutes left. Okay. Let me ask one more question, then I'll give you just a chance to say, sort of whatever you might want to say to students. There was an idea that the state should prohibit people from being disappeared, prohibit people from being kidnapped by anyone. It's an idea which has, I think, tremendous resonance in university campuses because of what we've seen happen to students who are, and in some cases, faculty and staff who are high-profile people involved in the pro-Palestine demonstrations, who are then, arrested off the street. Some of this has been on video. It's incredibly disturbing. These plainclothes officers just come and it feels like they don't identify themselves and they kidnap. It looks like kidnapping. And then, I know this because of clients, as what I was telling you before this event started, clients in New York, these agents come, arrest the person. He's lawfully present. In this particular case, it was a TPS holder. The person is lawfully present, living with a small child and his partner. And within just a very short time, he's shipped to South Texas, totally far away from any legal resources, everything. Just happened to have a brilliant and dedicated lawyer in New York who was, kind of willing to do whatever, had to happen late at night. So the idea would be a law that actually tries to get at this. no doubt very aggressive, I think, in terms of the balance of state and federal power, but that would try to make a basic principle that Californians are not going to be just like plucked off the streets and sent far away without any kind of process. And there's another question. Just curious if you have any. I know this is like just asking you on the spot, but if you have any thoughts or reactions to that.
It's a proposal for a California state law.
Yeah, I don't think that it's something that the attorney general could, or I don't know, maybe you tell me. But yeah, I think the concept is a proposal for a California state law and maybe other state laws too. I mean, and it obviously has a historical valence with, fugitive slave, right? I mean, that's the kind of origin point idea about this is, they may like to do this in some parts of the country, but we're not going to allow it to happen here to our people. And yeah, so the idea would be that states that want to oppose this kind of activity would pass a law like that.
Mm-hmm. I like where it's going, and I understand the thinking behind it. I think there, on the specific issue of a state law, I think there is going to be some sensitive state-federal interactions. But but the part I want to push back on is it suggests that a law is needed to make it unlawful. I think it's unlawful already to not provide due process or to seize somebody without the appropriate probable cause or reason. We do have habeas corpus, and you can't just disappear people and take them away. I mean, that's a lot about what's happening with the Abrego Garcia, and in the Venezuelans that were put on a plane to El Salvador, with some of the students who've been detained, and it's shocking the conscience to people, and I think is already unlawful. And there's already standards and requirements to be met to be able to, for a government to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And on that, and so maybe I'll sort of just go into some final remarks here. I mean, that's what the U.S. Constitution was, or at least some of the amendments were focused on this idea of a overreaching government that is, putting soldiers in your home or searching and seizing you or your things without an appropriate reason or probable cause. And those protections have all been put in place, and they have stood the test of time. They are here for these reasons. Now, I mean, we haven't seen something this abusive in a long time, but it never ceases to amaze me the prescience, the clairvoyance, the forward thinkingness of the founders to be able to put certain protections in place. But it's supposed to be guard against the abuses of a tyrant, of a king, of an autocrat. And we're seeing some of those in real time right now, unfortunately. And so I'll end with this. My mother is an immigrant to this country. I was born in another country and brought here. I was born in the Philippines when I was, and when I was 2 months, my parents looked at themselves and they said, can we raise our son here and ensure that he has the things that we want for him and that we believe are non-negotiable for our family. We want him to have democracy and freedom. We want him to have the rule of law and due process. We want him to have human rights and civil rights. And their assessment and their answer to that question was unfortunately no. A dictator was rising to power. Martial law was around the corner. They were right about their prediction about where the Philippines was headed exactly a year from the date of my birth. Martial law was declared, free and fair elections were over, democracy gone. Political opponents to the dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, were often arrested, imprisoned, tortured, and killed. My mom wanted democracy for her people, and so they brought me here to LA. We lived in Echo Park. We arrived here when I was 2 months old. And they also believe that you have to fight for the things that you want. You can't just hope for them and wait for them. So they started working for the United Farm Workers of America. We lived in the headquarters of the UFW. My dad worked in the front office with Cesar Chavez. My mom worked with Dolores Huerta in the preschool. My dad had earlier marched in Selma, Alabama, was in Brown Chapel AME Church as part of the Civil Rights Movement when Martin Luther King Jr. showed up to speak to him and the congregation. And then when we eventually got to Sacramento when I was in first grade, and I would go to protests and rallies and demonstrations with my mom all the time. And it was calling out the human rights abuses of Ferdinand Marcos, and I always wondered why we did it, what it meant for me, what some kid could do for a dictator who's literally another continent and an ocean away. And I realized that year after year that I wasn't alone, and there were others who were rising up more and more year after year in the United States, in the Philippines, until in 1986, 14 years from the declaration of martial law, the People Power Revolution chased the dictator out of the Philippines, ushered democracy back into the country. And it and the Colombian student who was taken away, Khalil,
Mahmoud Khalil.
Mahmoud Khalil. My mom sent me an article about him when that happened, and she said, "This reminds me of the Marcos dictatorship." And it was chilling to hear her say that. She had never said anything like that before. But she was a lawful permanent resident for most of her adult life. And then when I had the crazy decision to run for office, and I was my first competitive election, she came in one day before the election, months before, and she said, "I'm going to become a U.S." She calls me Babe. So she says, "Babe, I'm gonna become a U.S. citizen so I can vote for you in the next election."
Oh, that's
And so she became a U.S. citizen in time to vote for me in the next election. I knew from that day forth I would never be shut out in any election that I run for. I would always have at least one vote from my loving mother. But I think it's important to come to this work with our own lived experiences. You know, those are some of mine. Having a mom who's an immigrant, being born in another country and brought here, and having parents who fought for a more fair, a more just United States.
Yeah.
And I think we're called now to demand more of ourselves, to step up and fight harder in ways that don't put yourselves in harm's way or danger. I know, I saw my parents when they were activists ask people with power, people with elected office, fancy titles, to side with them and fight with them. And I also saw those people mostly say no. They had other priorities. And I decided to run for office so that I could say yes. Yes to community members, yes to people who've been forgotten or overlooked or mistreated or abused, treated unjustly, and help them and use my positional power. So that's what I'm committed to doing. I have an important role. I've always thought I never thought I would be the Attorney General, by the way. You know, a brown boy born in another country, raised here by working class parents. I grew up in Sacramento, and I would drive by the Capitol because my parents worked for the state. But I looked in the Capitol, and I always wondered who was in there and how they got there, and observed that none of them looked like me. And it was geographically close, but it could have been a million miles away. It was so far out of reach for me. So being in office is something I don't take for granted, and I'm very honored and privileged. I never thought I could be AG. Sometimes I don't think I'm the AG still. And I'll confess to you, I go online to check our DOJ website to see if my name and my photo are really there, and get very excited when I see it, because it means I can sue Trump more for unlawful things. I can fight for the people of California when they need a champion. And that's my commitment to our immigrant communities and our allies of the immigrant communities and advocates. I'll fight as hard as I can for you, have your back, lift up our immigrants, make sure you're treated justly, and make sure that the law is followed and that you're not unfairly treated by the Trump administration. So I will fight with everything I got, and I know you all will too. And I think together we can be very successful.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rob. We truly appreciate your coming. And for those online who haven't seen the end of it, we will be posting this before too long. So thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. So thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.